G'day and welcome to another episode of Tomo's Tune-Ups. On this episode, I'm going to show you how to buff your car, and the best time to do it, like we said before, is both Christmas and tax time. Now this episode is proudly sponsored by Penrith City Tyres Automotive, Sinclair Hyundai Penrith and the Fit Dad Lifestyle. So before we start introducing the electric buffer, we've got to make sure the car is nice and clean. So if you haven't already seen how to wash your car using the 2-bucket method, check it out in the link above. So let's get to it. Alright, so now that we have given the car a wash, the next thing I'm going to do is quickly just lap it around the block. This is going to help get rid of any extra water that is inside any of the grooves, inside any of the windows, or even the mirrors. We just quickly run around the block, get all that extra water off. We'll come back, we'll give it a quick chamois, and then we can get into showing you how to do the buffing of the car. So, see you in a sec. Alright, next thing, we give it a quick dry, and then we can get on to buffing it. So now that we've finished chamoising the car, we're going to go do the tyres, make them all nice and shiny. That way if there's any overspray, we can clean it up later. And it's easier to clean it up before we buff it than it is to clean it up after we buff the entire car. Also, if you have any rubber or vinyl trims along the outside of the car, you can use a particular vinyl or rubber cleaner that'll help it shine as well as protect it from the UV rays. Alright, so now comes the fun part. We get to start doing the buffing. We're going to be using Auto Glim. I've been using this on all my cars for many months and even years now, and their products are just simply amazing. You can buy these online or you can buy them at your local Super Cheap Auto. So we're going to be using the Super Resin Polish on the electric buffer. Now the buffer that I'm using is a Ryobi one. It is a 1+ buffer. They come in a couple of different sizes. This is the larger one of the two. It also comes with 2 different application pads, if I can just not be butterfingers and drop them. So we have the applicator pad, which is the thinner one. It kind of looks like a bit of a hair net. This is what we're going to be sliding over the top of the buffer to begin with. And then we have the polishing pad. Now this is just a real soft, fine mitten that goes over the top. So you can either use this or you can use a microfiber cloth. Now I also like to go to Super Cheap Auto and buy particular things for particular jobs. This is a buffing cloth that has it written here. Also you can buy these in different applicators depending if you want to be using it on some rubber or vinyl trims, even glass and window cleaner. So these are for buffing, but we might use a combination of both. Now when you're buffing a car, not only do you want to make sure that it is nice and clean to begin with, but also the ambient temperature is not too high, nor is the humidity. If the temperature is too high, by the time you put the polish on there and you go around, it's going to go real chalky and it's going to be really hard to remove. When you're buffing a car, you can do it several different methods. People can do it by hand, they can use electric buffers, they can use a corded buffer, whatever style you like to use. Some people I know actually use water on the car before they start the buffing. So they'll spray it with a light mist of water and then buff over the top of it. That's completely fine. This is the method that I do. As I said, there are hundreds out there, so you can choose the method that you want to use. One thing you need to remember is that when you're using a buffer, is that you're also going to be coming in close contact with other surfaces. So for instance, the tail lights and even the top roof spoiler. So when you're doing these areas, you want to get as close to as you can, but also not too close, because the contour of the car comes up on an angle and then straight up here. You don't want to be going too far down and applying too much pressure. The reason for this is the surface area is quite high. So as you can see, there is a couple of finger gap between there. You're not going to be buffing the entire surface. If you want to get yourself a different size buffer, you can use smaller ones. I think they're a 4 or 6 inch pad, but this one I think is a 9 inch. So it'll do majority of the car. I do have a snap-on one that I use, but I've got it currently at work for little jobs that we do here and there. So what I generally do there is do majority of the car using the large buffer, and then the remaining parts of the car that I can't use a large part of the buffer on, I'll use it around the smaller parts, or even just do it by hand. When you're getting nice and close to areas, you want to make sure that you're not going to be touching the sides of them. For this, for instance, where it is a fairly sharp edge, it will catch the edge of the buffing pad and it will just rip it straight off. Okay, so another thing you also want to be careful of is not only the sharp edges, but any stickers that you might have on the car. So for instance, my Mini, it has vinyl stickers on the bonnet. You don't want to be getting too close to them because it will start to burn the paint and it will start to lift the vinyl sticker itself. Now in terms of burning the paint, that's going to happen when you're just applying too much pressure in the one area. So you're pushing it on it for too long, and it's going to cause that area to become hot, which is then going to start to burn the paint and start to discolor it. So generally what you want to be doing is working back and forth like you would be washing or even painting a car. So for those of you out there who's ever done any sort of painting, whether it be an aerosol can or even just in a spray booth, you want to make sure that you follow the contour of the car. So you want to be going back and forth like you would when you're painting it. So the same when you be using a buffer, you want to be working it back and forth the same way that you would be painting. You don't want to be going up and down, because then that's what's going to introduce cross hatches and scratches inside the car. So we're going to be working back and forth, side to side. Now this just doesn't spin around in a circle, but it also goes in a bit of a reciprocating motion. So it's up and down, side to side. It's going to ensure that it not only focuses in one area, but it also vibrates and moves all the way around. So we're going to be applying the resin to the buffing pad to begin with. We're going to then dab it on the side of the car to make sure that majority of it has been worked off, and that way when we start up, it's not going to fly everywhere like a milkshake maker being over full. So once it's on there, we're then going to be working back and forth. As I said before, all the contoured lines, try and find a nice even pattern, and then if you need to work it on a slight bit of an angle, you can, but just be careful with the different angles that you're not holding in the same spot for too long. If you're unsure or you want to come back to it, leave it blank and then you can do it by hand, or alternatively use a smaller buffer. All right, so we grab the resin, and what we want to be doing is just applying a couple of drops on there. We don't want to be going ham on it, nor do we want to be applying too little. So when it decides to come out, so a couple of dabs on there is all we need, and that's it. Now you want to do this not only on a really low humidity day, but also on a day where there isn't a lot of heat. So you don't want to be doing it in direct sunlight, because today it's about 22 degrees centigrade and it is quite overcast. It is a nice ambient temperature out here. If you do it in the sun, it's going to bake on there. You want to do it in a nice cool environment. If you can do it inside a shed or even under cover, even better. So let's get started. So switch it on, then we get to work. So once again, just dabbing it on there, nice and easy, as far along as you can before it starts to run out. And we start it up again, and away we go. Make sure you start it though when it's on the car. Alright, so we're pretty much done with the car, other than a couple little spots. So you can probably see there's a couple little light scratches here that I've got on the back of the bumper from when I was transporting a subframe back for a customer. So I'm going to try and work those off. If we can't get them off with the electric buffer, we can either do it by hand or use my smaller snap-on one. Now, Some scratches will come off depending how deep they are, but the best way to get them off is to go the exact same plane pattern in which they are. So if they're up and down, move it up and down. If they're side to side, move the buffer, the applicator, whatever it is that you're using, side to side. So in the same direction in which the scratch is. Don't try and go all around the shop, otherwise it'll catch the edges and then it will start making swirls and then do further damage. So it's taking a little bit of a working in order for me to get it off, but it is definitely becoming less and less apparent the more that I work it. All right, so they're pretty much gone. There's still a light one here, but it is just a little bit deeper than the other one. So this one's pretty much gone. You can't see much. There is a little bit of a scuff at the end, but that's actually taken paint off. So we've got some touch-up paint. We can go over that when we're finished. So next step we're going to do is, I think the battery is almost running out on this, which it definitely is. We're just going to get the microfiber cloth and go over the entire car, remove any excess, and if we miss any bits, we'll come back and do them by hand. So here's Tomo's tech tip. Make sure that when you're using a applicator pad or even a microfiber cloth, it is nice and clean. So as soon as you finish, throw it in the wash and then put it in a nice clean cupboard where you know where it is and you're not going to use it as a rag or even mistake it as a rag. So we're just going to grab the microfiber cloth and we're just going to work it back and forth. Make sure that after you've accumulated a little bit of debris on there, that you then rotate it. So one of my pet peeves of after washing a car is having to wind the windows down. Because my son's decided to come out and join us, I don't want him to cook in there, so I've had to let the windows down, but fingers crossed they are dry enough. Now, the last thing I'm going to do before we finish up is I'm going to show you how to apply it manually. So for instance, we're going to do it on the side mirrors, maybe in some small trims at the front, but essentially I'm just going to show you on the side mirrors how to do it. That way, if you need to do it by hand, your car's too big, too small, you need to get in real tight areas, you know how to do it. So let's get on to that. All right, so not sure if you can hear, but my son's listening to Billy Idol in the car. So these are the applicator pads that we're going to use. They're really cheap. They're like a couple of bucks for a pack of 3 or 4. You might as well just go buy half a dozen packets, and that way as they get full of the polish, you can then just toss them out and get new ones. You can wash them, but for the cost of it, you might as well just go and buy new ones. So sometimes I use different applicator pads for different applications. So there might be one just for polish that I'll put on, for instance, like this one, or if I'm applying a protectant around the outside of the wheel arch trims, because it is a plastic, I do want to protect it, I'll use a different one and I'll label it, or I'll keep it in a separate area. That way I don't get them mixed up. So let's show you how to apply this. So pretty much it's just going to be the same method. We're just going to be applying it, just rubbing it on in a bit of a circle. If there's any scratches on there, do it in the same way that the scratches run. Now there's a couple up here, but they're not overly bad. So you just want to apply it like you did before, where it has the really chalky sort of coat, and then move on to the next side. Once it dries, we're then just going to remove it with the same microfiber cloth. All right, so like I was saying before, using these applicator pads are really handy, especially when you need to get in really tight areas like this, if you want to be doing something in particular. I do have a real small one at work. I think it's probably about the same size as this, so probably about 4, maybe 5 inches in diameter, and it's the snap-on one that I've got. You can buy these in Milwaukee, and I'm sure other brands as well. They are really handy, especially on the Mini, where you do have a lot of really tight areas where you can't get something large in there. So if you can't do it by hand, get a small one and really just work it in there with the different angles and the different applicators that you can buy. Make sure you use a really fine one or a coarse one, depending on what you're doing, but make sure you read and follow the instructions really carefully. Otherwise, if you use something too coarse on there, you'll find you'll just start really ripping into it. So if it really needs a good cut and a really good polish, then probably assess it beforehand and determine which ones you need to use rather than just going ham and then destroying your paintwork. So we just do it the exact same way. Just grab your microfiber cloth and give it a rub and just remove off any of the excess. So that's pretty much how you buff your car using an electric buffer. As I said, you can use an applicator pad depending on the amount of room that you have, or if you don't have access to an applicator, you can use cordless ones, you can use ones with a cord. It just depends on your budget and how much time you have available. So make sure that when you do it, you wash your car first, you get rid of any debris, and get yourself a really clean rag, or even just a really clean cloth to make sure that you wipe off any of the excess before you start, and that way you can ensure you've got a really clean surface before you start working on the car. Like I've said before in my previous videos, I generally try and do this around Christmas time and tax time. Christmas, you've generally got some time off, so why not just spend a couple of hours doing it, and tax time, you've generally got the money to do it, so why not? There are heaps of methods that you can use. There are more steps in which I generally detail my car, but I don't want to make this video too long, so we'll address that in another episode. But thanks heaps for watching, guys. We'll see you next time right here on Tomo's Tune Ups.